Chapter 2 La Cité des Cloches. Sora landed on a street paved with stone and lined with brick houses. This looked like a pretty big city. He was always excited to visit a new world for the first time. I wonder what the people are like around here. Across the way, Sora spotted an older man dressed in striking black and purple robes walking toward him. There was an unpleasant look in his eyes, and he scared Sora a little. Sensing that the man's nasty glare was directed at him, Sora tensed up as they walked by each other.
Stop.
The man called a moment later, bringing Sora to a halt. What? Who, me?
I've never seen you before. Your name?
I'm Sora, he replied with a grin, his arms crossed behind his head as usual. There's no problem. I haven't done anything wrong, so there's no need to be nervous.
Such disgusting attire.
The man sneered.
I know what you are. A gypsy.
A gypsy? What's that?
Judge Frollo, sir.
A golden-haired, bearded man in armor hurried over to them. He seemed like a decent guy, at least.
What is the matter, Captain Phoebus?
The judge asked coldly, turning round.
Can't you see I'm interrogating this gypsy?
So this man must be Phoebus, and the older guy was called Frollo.
This kid here, but sir, he's just a boy.
Sora wasn't just any old boy, naturally, but it seemed like the best course of action here was to keep his mouth shut. Instead, he listened to their conversation.
I shall be the judge of that. Now, Captain, did you have something to report to me, or did you not?
Yes, sir. Monsters. They've invaded the square, Phoebus reported. At the word monsters, Sora reacted. They had to be Dream Eaters. Monsters? I'll take care of it! He summoned his Keyblade into his hand and ran off toward the square Phoebus had come from. Hey, wait! It's not safe! The captain took off after him. Frollo clenched his ringed fingers into a fist as he watched them go.
This city is overrun. For decades I've worked to purge the city of those wretched gypsies, and now the streets teem with even more disgusting vermin that threaten law and order. A dark aura coiled around Frollo's body, invisible to everyone, and especially to him. Sora rushed into the square to find that he was right about the Dream Eaters. There was a single human, too, sitting astride one Dream Eater that looked like a big elephant. He was waving his hands around happily. That Dream Eater seems more like a nightmare than a spirit. There was also confetti in the air for some reason. What are you doing? You need to run! Sora shouted a warning at the young man, who was far from handsome with his stooped back and asymmetrical features. He looked at Sora. Oh no, I couldn't. Today's the festival, and look, I'm the King of Fools. A festival? He does seem to be enjoying himself, but still. As Sora wondered, one of the Dream Eaters broke from the pack and flew off. Phoebus had just arrived and slashed at the creature's back with his sword. Behind him, Frollo walked into the square. Quasimodo!
He barked at the young man sitting on the elephant. It's my master. Quasimodo cradled his head fearfully. Suddenly, the eyes of the elephant Dream Eater underneath him flashed red, revealing its true violent nature. It bucked the boy off its back and boxed him in with the help of the other nightmares. No! Oh, please stop! Quasimodo desperately pleaded with the Dream Eaters, hoping to get them to listen, but they were already well past that point. Why doesn't anything ever go the way I want it to? Sora darted between Quasimodo and the Dream Eaters, then shouted over his shoulder, Get to safety! But Quasimodo didn't budge. Just then, a woman hurried over. Let me help, she said. She had voluminous black hair and determined eyebrows. Huh? Who are you? Esmeralda. I'm a gypsy. She introduced herself in a calm tone. Thank you. I'm Sora. Sora stood ready to face the Dream Eaters while behind him, Esmeralda held out her hand to Quasimodo. Though he didn't take her hand, he did hurry after her to the cathedral on the other side of the square. Phoebus smiled after the two, but Frollo regarded them with a resentful glare.
Gypsy witch,
he snarled. Completely oblivious to their reactions, Sora charged into the throng of Dream Eaters. Time to get to work! He knew how to fight thanks to his battles in Traverse Town, and while he may not have had Donald and Goofy at his side, he did have his spirit friend. Meow Wow rammed one of the monsters to stun it, and Sora hit it with a downward strike. The other Dream Eaters were really going crazy, and some of them had even climbed up the tents scattered around the square. Sora sprang into the air, spinning once around the tent pole to gather momentum, and dropped onto a Dream Eater with a downward thrust. Piece of cake! Once he had dealt with all the monsters, Sora paused for a breath and looked up at the cathedral where Quasimodo and Esmeralda had fled. Sora had been to all kinds of worlds by this point, but he was pretty sure this was his first time seeing a huge stone building like this one. It kind of reminded him of the big clock tower from Peter Pan's world. Concerned about Quasimodo and Esmeralda, he ran up the stone steps to a pair of enormous doors. Sora peered through the entryway into the cathedral, where the ray of light from outside pierced through the gloom of its solemn interior. Hey! There was no one inside. Sora stepped through the doors and walked all the way to the back of the huge chapel. But aside from a few dream eaters that popped out, there was no sign of Quasimodo and Esmeralda. Where could they have gone off to? Sora tilted his head to one side. Meow was rolling around idly in one of the beams of light near the entrance. Having a good time? Meow. As Sora knelt down and rubbed the spirit's belly, he noticed the light was coming from an opening for a spiral staircase leading up to the floor above. Guess we should try upstairs. Come on, let's go. Sora and Meow climbed the stairs to the roof of the cathedral. Wow, it feels great up here! The top of the structure offered a view of the city. This place was pretty big. Huh? When he looked down at the square, Sora noticed something. A group of what seemed to be soldiers were peering into the building. He had a feeling something really bad was happening. Where did those two go, anyway? Sora spotted a small door as he walked around the roof. It was the only one ajar. Maybe that was where Quasimodo and Esmeralda had gone. He stepped inside to find a place that looked to be a garret among the wooden crossbeams of the frame. There were 3 stone statues, and above him, Quasimodo and Esmeralda were standing next to a giant bell. This must be the bell tower. This is Big Marie. Quasimodo pointed out the huge bell to Esmeralda. It looked big enough to fit 10 people inside. Esmeralda peeked into it. Hello! As her voice echoed, the bell answered with a tiny timorous ring. Quasimodo told her warmly. Looks like Quasi's gonna be just fine, Sora whispered, watching them talk together with peaceful smiles.
Indisputably. He's tough. We may be hard as stone, but Quasi's stronger.
At the sound of voices from behind him, Sora turned around. I know! Whoa! Talking gargoyles? He yelped. He'd met all kinds of people by now, but never talking gargoyles. All the moving statues he knew attacked people, although there were talking teapots back there too. Excuse us for having a personality, retorted the smallest of the gargoyles, the one in the middle. Just then, Sora felt someone come up behind him. It was Esmeralda, watching the square uneasily from a window. It looks like they've got the place surrounded, she said. She must have spotted the soldiers Sora saw earlier.
You could stay here forever,
Quasimodo offered. No, I couldn't. Her response was firm.
Oh yes, you have sanctuary,
the boy said, somewhat confused. But not freedom. Gypsies don't do well inside stone walls, she told him, starting to walk away. You helped me, now I will help you, Quasimodo declared after a moment's thought. But there's no way out. There's soldiers at every door. So those soldiers I saw before were after Esmeralda. Sora resolved himself to help her out too, if he could.
We won't use a door, Quasimodo said to Esmeralda, picking her up. It's all right. Are you ready?
A moment later, he jumped out of the window. Didn't expect that. Apparently, there was no need for Sora to take the stage here. He turned back to the gargoyles. So how come you and Quasimodo are so close? One by one, the statues told him the story. We've been friends for years, began the brownish gargoyle in the center. Her name was Laverne. She sounded like an old woman.
More than a decade of camaraderie,
added Victor, the tall, bluish gargoyle on the right. He talked a little more confidently than the others. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, said Hugo, the chubby green member of the trio. All the gargoyles had horns on their heads. He never leaves? Sora asks. He's not allowed to leave, said Laverne. Judge Frollo forbids it. That was a strange rule, really strange. Sora decided to ask the 3 statues. Why?
Care to pull up a stool?
Muttered Victor.
The short version is, Frollo thinks he's doing Quasi a favor by keeping folks from seeing that mug of his, Hugo explained. After a lifetime of watching from the nosebleed seats, Quasi just wanted to go to the Feast of Fools, said Laverne, and we're so proud of him for finally working up the courage to do it.
The 3 of them seemed to be worried about Quasimodo's welfare. No one would ever describe him as handsome, not even to be polite. But that was no reason to bar him from leaving this place.
"'Tis a shame those creatures dashed his hopes,"
Victor lamented. You should talk, Hugo jeered. When was the last time you looked in a mirror?
"Well, you broke it,"
Victor barked, rounding on Hugo. Oh, wise guy, eh? Knock it off, you couple of blockheads. Laverne shut them down before Hugo could do any more taunting, then returned to the topic at hand. I just hope this one failure doesn't cause Quasi to give up. He was so close. Quasimodo had finally broken free into the outside world. It would be awful if he let his heart become his new prison. Don't worry, I'll go talk to him. Sora turned away from the gargoyles and dashed out of the bell tower after Quasimodo. Sora ran down the spiral staircase and out of the chapel, then sprinted through the square. Then a voice called for him to stop.
"Oh, hello again. Sora, was it?"
That's the guy who was with Frollo earlier. I'm pretty sure his name was Phoebus. He doesn't look quite as imposing without his armor on. His white shirt and pants weren't very captain-like at all. Still, Sora was bracing himself for conflict. Frollo had locked Quasimodo up, and if this guy was friends with him, that meant he was up to no good. But Phoebus spread his arms and smiled.
Easy, I'm not looking for any sort of fight.
He sure didn't seem like a bad person, especially when he was trying to calm Sora down. Sora relaxed a little and dropped out of his fighting stance.
Finally, someone sensible. I'm Phoebus.
After introducing himself, the man looked up at the great stone facade.
Tell me, is she still safe at the cathedral?
He must be talking about Esmeralda. If she is Esmeralda, then Quasimodo helped her escape. Phoebus's expression clouded over.
Blast.
What's wrong? Sora asked the pensive captain.
It's Judge Frollo. He's obsessed with destroying the gypsies, and his mind is in a dark place. When I objected to his barbarous actions, he banished me from the guards.
What? That's not fair.
Don't worry about me. Frollo said he'd found the Court of Miracles, the gypsies' haven within the city. Esmeralda and her friends are in danger. We have to find them and warn them before Frollo gets there.
That was when they heard someone behind them. It was Quasimodo. Sora and Phoebus rushed over to him and saw a small pendant lying at his feet. Quasimodo! Esmeralda's in trouble, Sora told him, but the young man was still staring at the ground.
Where did she go?
Asked Phoebus.
I don't know. She just vanished into the streets,
Quasimodo said sadly, then scooped up the pendant. So Esmeralda had taken off without even telling him where she was headed.
She gave me this pendant. Esmeralda said this would help us find her. When you wear this woven band, you hold the city in your hand.
Quasimodo gazed at the pendant, a small round wooden frame crisscrossed the lattice of thread. There was a tiny cross in the center and a miniature gem decorating the pattern.
It's the city! It's a map, see?
Quasimodo cried out in excitement.
Here's the cathedral and the river. Go this way, cross the bridge, and the Court of Miracles.
As someone who spent nearly all his time looking out over the city from the rooftop, it didn't take long at all for Quasimodo to solve the puzzle. Sora certainly couldn't have done it.
Well done, Quasimodo!
Phoebus gave him a pat on the back. Yeah, Quasi, nice! Sora took him by the arm happily.
Yes, I'm going to save her.
The trio hurried to the Court of Miracles, the hidden bastion of the gypsies.
This way!
Sora and Phoebus followed Quasimodo over a bridge. Hey, Quasimodo, I thought you'd never been out of the city before.
Well, I've always been looking at it, so I know everything there is to know about its streets,
he replied, looking back at Sora. I'm not surprised. I'm new around here, so I don't know my way around like you do. Whoa! The trio's path was barred by Dream Eaters, prompting Phoebus to immediately draw his sword. Leave this to me! You take cover, Quasimodo! Sora readied his keyblade as well, then dropped into his fighting stance.
Allow me to lend a hand.
Phoebus attacked them with his steel, and as might be expected from a captain of the guard, his skills with the blade were impressive. Here we go! Together, Sora, Phoebus, and Meow Wow dispatched the Dream Eaters. Once all their foes were gone, Sora called out to Quasimodo, who was cowering behind some boxes. The coast is clear, Quasi! He lowered his hands from his face and got to his feet.
You two are incredible,
he said sadly with a look between them. Don't sweat it, Sora reassured him. We never would have figured out the pendant without you, and plus, you're the one who knows the lay of the land, right?
If you say so.
Quasimodo didn't seem convinced.
He's right, Quasimodo. We're going to need your guidance from here on out, too,
Phoebus said, placing a hand on Quasimodo's back.
Okay.
Sora and Phoebus shared a look once the boy began to walk off. He's really locked himself away, hasn't he?
All of Frollo's commands are like chains around him,
Phoebus said gravely. Quasimodo had never known anything except the inside of the cathedral, and he'd had hardly anyone to talk to except Frollo and the gargoyles. What would it take to restore his faith in himself? We just need the right chance, Sora mused. Quasimodo turned back toward them.
Over here,
he called, beckoning them into a dimly lit cemetery.
I think this is the entrance.
One of the gravestones had been shifted aside, revealing a dark stairwell that led underground. We're going in there? Sora peered nervously into the gloom beyond the stairs.
These are the catacombs,
said Phoebus. The what? Sora asked.
The city has an enormous burial ground beneath it since long ago. That's why they say the streets are built over graves.
But the city was so beautiful. Sora had never imagined he might meet a ghost underneath it.
We'd better hurry,
Quasimodo urged. Right! Sora mustered his courage and descended the steps. Oh man! The catacombs were steeped in a musty stench and murky light, with skulls piled along the walls. Quasimodo stood in the center, turning his head this way and that. What's the matter, Quasimodo?
I don't know which way to go,
the youth said anxiously as he looked at Sora. Oh yeah, I guess you can't see what's underground from the roof. Sora crossed his arms.
We'll just have to keep moving forward then,
Phoebus said. Still, they didn't know the right path. That was when Meow Wow took off running ahead of them. Huh? Where are you going? Sora hurried after him and found him wagging his tail by the wall. Sora recalled how Meow Wow had showed him the way back in Traverse Town and the cathedral.
I think there's a cave on the other side. There's a breeze,
Phoebus said, with an ear pressed to the wall. Which means... Sora gave the wall a good whack with his keyblade, and it crumbled. Let's go! He entered the tunnel beyond the wall and pressed onward. Up a set of stairs at the far end was the Court of Miracles, full of colorful tents and groups of wagons. Esmeralda! The three had found her at last. Quasimodo, what are you doing here? Esmeralda looked at them curiously.
Phoebus and I came to warn you, said Quasimodo. Frollo's on the way.
Phoebus nodded.
Take what you can and flee.
Esmeralda's skirt fluttered about her ankles as she whirled to make her preparations, when a deep voice rang out.
Well done, Captain Phoebus.
Sora and the others turned toward the one who had spoken.
Thankfully, you are every bit as predictable as I had hoped.
It was Frollo, flanked by a gang of Dream Eaters. The judge smirked.
Dear Quasimodo, I always knew you would someday be of use to me,
he murmured as he approached his ward. Quasimodo was frozen.
I have you at last, you witch,
Frollo said to Esmeralda.
There'll be a bonfire in the square.
Let go of me. Frollo seized Esmeralda's arms, but the Dream Eaters kept Sora and Phoebus from getting any closer.
No, please, master!
Though Quasimodo tried desperately to pursue them, Frollo fixed them with an icy, imperious gaze. Quasimodo froze again, like a frog caught in the eyes of a snake. Frollo, I won't let you do this, shouted Sora, but he couldn't go after the judge with the Dream Eaters in his way.
I'll leave them to you. We'll go on ahead. Come on, Quasimodo.
Phoebus dashed off, but Quasimodo remained with his eyes lowered. You have to go, Quasi! Sora shouted as he hammered the Dream Eaters that tried to go after Phoebus. However, the young man nervously turned away from Sora. You can't give up! Sora cried out again, and Quasimodo finally ran after Phoebus. It was like he was running away. After he had finally mopped up the Dream Eaters, Sora went after Quasimodo. Unfortunately, by the time he got back to the square, it was already a sea of flames with Esmeralda at the center, bound to a stake. Frollo stood before the gallows, watching her with a look of satisfaction. Esmeralda herself was limp, possibly unconscious. Esmeralda! Just as Sora made to rush over to her, someone swung down from the cathedral on a rope. It was Quasimodo. Using the rope, he kicked off the wall and made his way down to Esmeralda, then swiftly untied her and took her in his arms. Way to go, Quasi! Sora cheered as Quasimodo made his ascent back up the rope with the girl. The young man clambered up the wall of the cathedral, and once he was back on the rooftop, he shouted, "Sanctuary!" Frollo had watched the whole thing with his head craned upward, and when he heard the cry, he stomped his foot with fury and set out for the cathedral. Sora started after him, only to find a colossal shadow bearing down on him. A Dream Eater! The towering beast, Wargoyle, smashed the gallows platform and stood in Sora's way. The giant Dream Eater was similar to the Haka monkey he had faced in Traverse Town, but this one was wilder and more violent, with its enormous firearms attached to both arms. Wargoyle fired off round after round into the sky at terrifying speed, where the shots rained down on Sora all at once. Dodging and weaving his way between them, Sora glanced to the top of the cathedral. "You got this, Quasimodo!" Quasimodo and Frollo were glaring angrily at each other on the rooftop. The judge's hat had fallen off, and he gripped a blade in his hand. Esmeralda watched the scene anxiously from where she had fallen to the stone roof.
"I should have known you'd risk your life to save that gypsy witch, just as your own mother died in her pitiful attempt to save you,"
said Frollo. What? Then Quasimodo remembered what Frollo had said to him so long ago.
"Oh, my dear Quasimodo, you don't know what it's like out there. The world is cruel, and you are deformed and ugly. You will be shown little pity. You must believe me, I am your only friend. And how can I protect you, my dear boy, unless you stay in here? Remember, Quasimodo, this is your sanctuary."
That was why he had lived within the cathedral all this time, why he had never taken a step outside of it until recently. Then there was what Esmeralda had said about how she couldn't live without freedom. But what did freedom really mean? He had forsaken Frollo's instructions in order to save her. Maybe that was what it meant.
"Now, I'm going to do what I have done 20 years ago."
Frollo slashed with his blade at Quasimodo. Quasimodo ducked out of the way, but the force of the swing knocked both of them off balance and sent them over the edge of the roof. Suddenly, Esmeralda took hold of Quasimodo's hand. "Hold on! Hold on!" Beside him, Frollo had somehow managed to grab and climb onto one of the gargoyle sculptures sticking out from the roof. He bellowed with laughter.
"And he shall smite the wicked and plunge them into the fiery pit forever!"
The judge was poised to strike Esmeralda down with his sword as she desperately struggled to haul Quasimodo up. She was helpless to stop him. However, suddenly his footing shifted. The gargoyle adorning the church appeared to move, just like its fellows from before. Frollo slipped and caught hold of the figure's neck.
Ugh!
As he tried to hoist himself up again, the gargoyle slowly opened its mouth and bared its fangs. The cathedral was Quasimodo's sanctuary, and all of the statues around it were his friends. The gargoyle broke off, as if its base had crumbled, and dropped both itself and Frollo into the lake of fire in the square.
Ah!
Esmeralda was too busy trying to pull Quasimodo onto the roof to even see what had become of Frollo after his fall. "Quasimodo!" But she wasn't strong enough to do it on her own. Her arms couldn't take much more, and her strength was about to give out. "Quasi, no!" When Quasimodo began to slip out of her grip, Phoebus's powerful hand grabbed the young man and drew him up onto the roof. Once he had regained consciousness on the cathedral roof, Quasimodo took Phoebus into an embrace. The captain and Esmeralda had never once laughed at him because he was ugly. Neither did Sora. Esmeralda and Phoebus eventually shared a long look. Quasimodo got to his feet, took both of their hands and placed one on top of the other, then unfolded their hands between his own large ones. By the time Sora reached the cathedral roof, it was all said and done. Quasimodo was quietly watching Esmeralda and Phoebus as they walked away. The three statues had arrived behind him, and they were watching him. Sora noticed the sorrow in the set of his shoulders. "Quasimodo," he said, "you can't let your heart be a—" "I know." Quasimodo cut Sora off mid-sentence and turned around. "I can't blame Frollo for putting walls around me," he said, brimming with confidence. "It wasn't the walls that were holding me back." He gazed intently at what lay beyond the doors of the cathedral. "But my heart is free now. I'm ready to really see what's out there." With that resolute declaration, Quasimodo stepped toward the light. "Looks like we don't have a thing to worry about," commented Laverne, and the gargoyles went back to their customary spots. Sora turned back toward the gloomy chapel and looked at the statue in the center. All that time, Quasimodo let himself be trapped inside the nightmares Frollo gave him. He thought about what it really meant to let your heart be a prison and to let it live free. I can't imagine how painful and sad it must be to go through life with your heart locked away. You can't follow your heart and live the way you want.
Hypocrite, you are the one who has made your heart a prison.
Sora spun around at the unexpected voice. It was the silver-haired young man who had been speaking to Riku back in Traverse Town. You again! What are you talking about? Just then, for the barest sliver of a second, the man's form shifted into a near-perfect doppelganger of Sora himself, wearing a black suit for battle. Sora had never even seen him before, much less met him. So why do I feel like I know him?
Even if you are not the prisoner.
The young man and the boy condemned Sora in unison. What? Sora replied in utter confusion, but the man walked away and vanished into a corridor of darkness. Someone else is a prisoner in my heart? What does that mean? Is someone trapped in my heart? My heart's just mine, isn't it? Or maybe... Sora lowered his gaze and thought, am I like Quasimodo? Have I locked away my own heart too? At that moment, a light began to shine from the stained glass ceiling of the chapel, and at its center was a keyhole. Sora quietly raised his keyblade. As always, the light it fired disappeared into the keyhole and opened the way. As he regained the open gateway, Sora felt uncertainty spreading through his chest. My heart's a prison? Worried, Meow Wow nestled up against Sora's legs, where he stood, lost in thought.